start. Oh, can you mute yourself so you don't go out when I stream? Welcome to Town Hall Thursday. I am your host, Darryl W. Perry, Libertarian for governor. And look at this. It's unmuted. Yeah, I didn't wind up keeping myself muted for the first 17 minutes of the show this week. And I just got audience applause. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, we are very close to the election. We are 12 days away, and I do realize that some people have already cast their ballots, like I have. Yeah, I wound up actually turning in my absentee ballot, I believe, 2 weeks ago, where I actually went in to Manchester City Hall, turned in the ballot for myself and my wife. And apologies if random parts of me wind up being blurred by the background. I don't know what's going on, where for some reason Zoom earlier had my entire face matching in the background, and then it had my shirt and the background. I'm not in the normal office that I normally do these from because, well, the AC apparently doesn't work there anymore. So I'm in a different office where the AC does work, but the lighting isn't as good. So, uh, well, what's the saying? You take the good, you take the bad, you mix it up, and there you have the facts of life. The facts of life. Um, and I totally forget where I was going with that, but I noticed something on my face in my screen there, and it totally threw my brain for a loop. Oh, yes, 2 weeks from the election, roughly, actually, just under 2 weeks. So, one more town hall next Thursday on the 29th. And then, of course, the Zoomtastic Voyage. Yes, that's what I'm calling it. The election night Zoomtastic Voyage will be happening on the Zoom. There's actually going to be a different link instead of the darrellwperry.com/Zoom. There's a different link. There is a Facebook event as well. And it's going to just sort of be, me and hopefully other people hanging out, talking about various election results as they come in. And we do know already that in New Hampshire, there have been almost twice as many absentee ballots turned in so far this year for this election than there were for the entire 2016 election. I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but it was almost twice as many turned in, with a lot more absentee ballot applications that have been filed, but people haven't turned in the absentee ballot. And there was a question in one of the Facebook groups that I'm in where somebody said, if I request an absentee ballot, or Rather, if somebody requests one for me, can I vote in person? And the answer to that is yes, you can vote in person. Uh, and even that there's just a short time period during the day on election day itself where if you have turned in your absentee ballot, you can still go in and cast an in-person vote before they actually run your absentee ballot through the machine. But again, it's just a very short period, and I believe it has to be done before 9 a.m. Uh, you might want to check with your local city or town clerk or your moderator uh, just to double check if for some reason you think, well, I might be able to get to the polls, but I'm not entirely sure. Uh, I would say don't risk it. If you've already got the absentee ballot, go ahead, and it's probably too late to drop in the mail, but apparently, like, some of the postmaster generals are saying we will wind up taking or giving those priority and do our very best to get them to the city and town clerks before the end of the day on election day. But at this point, I would not risk trying to drop it in the mail. Take it down to city or town hall yourself, and just make sure that you don't put it in the drop box. That apparently it's okay legally for you to put your absentee ballot application in, and it's perfectly okay for you to drop your payment for a parking ticket or your property taxes in the drop box. But if you are to put an absentee ballot into the drop box, there must be someone standing there, which to me makes absolutely no sense. But that is what the law is, apparently. And speaking of the law is what the law is, the New Hampshire Attorney General's office, and how do you like that for a segue? New Hampshire Attorney General's office put out some guidance on Wednesday, so just yesterday, that has apparently angered the Republicans because the Republican Party in New Hampshire wants to statutorily change the qualifications for being an eligible voter in New Hampshire. The New Hampshire Constitution says every inhabitant at least 18 years of age has the right to vote. And there's, a few other words that are thrown in there, but that's the important stuff. It's, the kind of like the Second Amendment. The shall not be infringed is the important part. The well-regulated militia and something else is kind of there as justification for the shall not be infringed. But state constitution says every inhabitant has the right to vote. Again, over the age of 18, U.S. citizen, not currently serving for a felony, not having previously been convicted of a election-related offense. There are a handful of election-related offenses that will cause you to forever lose your right to vote in New Hampshire. But again, inhabitant. Inhabitant is defined in statute as someone who lives here, someone with domicile. And domicile is kind of one of those tricky words. I'm not going to try to unpack all of what domicile is, but in short, it is the place where you live for the majority of the year. And one thing that I personally find interesting is a lot of the Republicans that don't want college students to vote in New Hampshire, specifically out-of-state college students that aren't paying in-state tuition. They say, well, they have residency in another state. But you want to hear a little secret? There's a lot of people that are snowbirds that will live in New Hampshire for 6 to 8 months out of the year that claim residency in, say, Florida, for example, because they don't want to wind up paying certain taxes. They want the Florida vehicle registration because you don't have to get the vehicle inspection in Florida. There are reasons why somebody might want to claim residency in another state. New Hampshire statute says that if you claim residency in another state for any reason, you are not a resident of New Hampshire. But the Republicans want to change the requirements for being able to vote from domicile slash inhabitancy to residency. But they're not trying to amend the state constitution. They're trying to do it statutorily. Before I get into the article here from NHPR, there's a question here. So the homeless do not qualify to vote. No, the homeless do qualify to vote in New Hampshire because they are domiciled in New Hampshire. They don't have a permanent physical dwelling, and you actually can register to vote as homeless if you don't have, that permanent physical dwelling. You just tell the election supervisor or the city town clerk. I'll get to how do you prove domicile in a second. But you tell them I'm homeless, and they will ask you to point on a map where you generally stay. And that is specifically for if you live in a city, they know which ward to list you as being a registered voter in. Next question is, how do you prove domicile? That is a good question, Robert. You would do that the same way you would prove identity if you don't have a government issued ID card. And that is by filling out a what's called an affidavit, where you say, either I am who I say I am the age I say I am a citizen like I say I am, or I live where I say I do. There are 4 types of affidavits that you can fill out in New Hampshire to satisfy any of the different requirements. So if you don't have any documentation at all of who you are, how old you are, where you live, or whether you're a U.S. citizen, you can just fill out these forms. And of course, if you're lying on the forms, you will be prosecuted. And I believe that is one of the election offenses that will cause you to forever lose your voting rights in New Hampshire. So fraudulent voting, that's something else that certain people in New Hampshire, as well as in the White House, try to scare people about, right? Is, oh, well, we need all of these things to make sure that there isn't voter fraud. Well, the handful of cases where there's enough evidence to actually bring a case, and there are a lot of things that wind up being investigated, but there's only a handful where there's actually evidence to bring the case. It's generally somebody that's voting twice to prove how easy it is, which I do find a little ironic that the people that are committing the voter fraud are the people that are warning others about voter fraud and saying, see, it's really easy to commit voter fraud. I did it. Oh, and now I'm in jail. So let's get back into, or actually get into the update here from NHPR, where the AG put out their guidance saying that college students who have previously been registered to vote in New Hampshire, whether paying in-state tuition or not, do not automatically lose their voting eligibility for a temporary absence out of the state, even if they're absent due to remote learning, quote, or other circumstances. The letter comes in response to letters from the New Hampshire Republican Party seeking to prohibit students from voting in New Hampshire if they are learning remotely and don't have a current physical address in the state. Assistant Attorney General Nicholas Chong Yen, who leads the state's election law unit, wrote in a letter on October 21st that voting eligibility, quote, hinges on the facts relevant to the particular individual, and broad guidance may not capture every possible permutation. And again, he goes on to sort of talk a little bit more about temporary absence. And again, so let's say, for instance, that I go to Vermont for the day. That's a temporary absence. I don't automatically become a Vermont resident for going there for lunch and, to buy like some maple flavored beer. I'm guessing maple flavored beer exists. If it does, it's probably sold in Vermont. But that's a temporary absence. And then there's the question: oh, well, what if I'm gone for a month? What if I'm gone for a year? And that's where it starts getting a little tricky. Well, what then are your intentions? Are your intentions to return to your domicile, or are you establishing a new domicile? And this is one of those things. And I realize that, it's good to have nice, firm answers for everything of what defines temporary absence. Well, temporary can be different for different people. At one time in New Hampshire, the definition of residency was someone who made New Hampshire their home for the indefinite future, which meant that if you knew I'm going to live here for 10 years or 20 years, and when I retire, I am moving to fill in the blank, by the definition of for the indefinite future, meant that you could not be a New Hampshire resident because you had plans at some point to leave and establish residency elsewhere. And again, there's if you claim residency for any other reason, you are not a New Hampshire resident. So there's all of these contradictory sorts of definitions within statute that keep getting muddied by attempting to clarify things and then creating new definitions. And really, again, if the Republican Party, and I'm calling them out specifically because they're the party that keeps introducing and passing the rules to restrict who can vote and make it more difficult if you don't have any documentation. There was the bill SB3 that passed a couple of years ago, where if you did not have documentation, you could no longer fill out the domicile affidavit, but you could still fill out the citizenship, age, and identity affidavit. And if you didn't provide documentation after a certain point, there were criminal penalties, which basically meant that if you, for a variety of reasons, did not have a lease in your name, you did not have mail that came to your house and instead used a private mailbox, like the UPS store or FedEx office. And let's say you don't have a car, so therefore you don't have a driver's license. You wouldn't have the documentation that they want. If your apartment were leased under a name other than your own, then you would not have the documentation that they want to prove domicile. So there were all kinds of problems with that legislation. It wound up getting rammed through by the Republicans in New Hampshire. It got challenged. The courts have thrown it out, but there are additional challenges still going. There's also been a challenge to HB 1264, which was the redefining residency in New Hampshire. Again, it's been working its way through the courts. I believe the first court that heard that tossed out the law, but then there was some kind of stay, I believe. But yeah, these things are working through the courts. The Democratic controlled legislature in the past biennium tried to repeal those bills. Of course, Governor Sununu, who signed in the previous laws, vetoed the repeals, and the vetoes were sustained on veto override day. Continuing on here, just another quick quote. Chong Yen wrote in his response to the Republican Party, as the New Hampshire Supreme Court has recently confirmed, it reflects longstanding domicile law that a student living in New Hampshire and attending an institution of learning may lawfully claim domicile in the town or ward in which the student lives if the student's claim of domicile meets the requirements of New Hampshire's voting eligibility law. The Republicans, however, were not fully satisfied with the state's response. And in a follow-up letter sent Wednesday afternoon, attorney Sean List pressed the state to specify the terms under which students would retain their voting rights if living out of state. The letter also requested a response from the attorney general within 48 hours. Obviously, right now is within that 48-hour period, and I have not seen any update on this. I'll most likely touch on this next week during the final town hall Thursdays. And there's also a statement from the state Democratic Party spokeswoman, Holly Schulman, who says if you're a U.S. citizen, will be 18 years of age or older by election day, and your home is New Hampshire, even if you are temporarily absent, you can vote in New Hampshire. These rules apply to all Granite Staters, including military service members serving at a base outside of New Hampshire, college students who are currently learning remotely because of the pandemic, and other Granite Staters who are temporarily out of state. And this is something that I keep forgetting if the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire's platform touches on voting rights or not. But this is one of those issues that is in my platform where I want to protect the right to vote. Because, again, the state constitution says every inhabitant has the right to vote. It doesn't say every inhabitant who is friends with the city or town clerk gets to vote and everybody else, sorry. It doesn't say every resident. It doesn't say any other qualification other than every inhabitant. And of course, the 18 years of age is somewhere. It's not in that first sentence, but it's in there. The has to be a U.S. citizen. I forget exactly where that qualification is specified, but inhabitant, not resident, not any other higher standard. You don't have to be a white landowning male. You don't have to have a 100-pound estate. And there's a specific reason why I chose 100-pound estate, because that used to be a qualification for being a state rep in New Hampshire. Actually, state rep and state senator, which is referred to in the Constitution as the general court. So to be a member of the general court, you had to have at least a 100-pound estate. And that's from when the colonies at the time, or actually the former colonies, because the New Hampshire Constitution was established in 1784. So the former colonies that were fighting through officially declaring, they had declared independence. The treaty, I forget if it was Treaty of Versailles or Treaty of Paris, that officially recognized the U.S. as an independent country, had just been signed, but the official currency at the time was still the pound. It had not yet become the dollar when the U.S. or the New Hampshire Constitution was implemented before the U.S. Constitution that is now in effect. So looking very quickly at the New Hampshire Libertarian Party's platform, I do not see where we specifically mention voting rights per se of who's allowed to vote in New Hampshire, but we do write in the platform, we advocate for the implementation of an alternative voting system that eliminates the disenfranchisement of constituents who are not members of the factions currently represented within our electoral system. We advocate the liberalization of laws restricting access to the ballot for minor political organizations, non-affiliated individuals. Yes, so nothing specifically about we believe that all inhabitants of New Hampshire have the right to vote. Maybe I will make that proposal and bring it up at the next state convention, which is going to be in mid to late March. The details are still being worked out, so I can't say anything further about that. Plus, there's still the whole question of, will we actually be allowed to have an in-person convention next year? Will there be any restrictions that come up on the size of in-person events in March? So still a lot of unanswered questions about the COVID pandemic. Just one thing that I will say about the COVID pandemic, specifically here in Manchester, the Manchester City Council rejected a citywide mask mandate. I believe that was last night, so Wednesday the 21st. They did, however, adopt a requirement for wearing masks in city buildings, which is nowhere near as restrictive as requiring a mask anywhere in public. I don't know what the penalties are for not wearing in a city building. And then, of course, there's the question of, well, what about on election day? Can I be turned away and refused my right to vote if I don't wear a mask inside the polling place? And the answer to that is you can be turned away from entering the polling place, but they cannot stop you from voting. And you might be asking the question, how then do I vote if I can't enter the polling place, Darryl? That's a very good question, and I will tell you the answer. So there's actually a provision in statute. It's RSA 659:20-A that is specifically in there for anyone with a disability who, for reasons beyond their control, are not able to enter the polling place. And some of the examples that were given when this was introduced and passed is, well, let's say that there's a rainstorm and somebody has an electric wheelchair. There's a sitting puddle of water and it's on the sidewalk and they can't get the wheelchair through the puddle of water. Or the polling place is inside a building and it's on the second floor, but the elevator is broken. So there are extenuating circumstances where somebody gets to the polling place but can't actually enter the polling area. So you can request what is, there's a legal term for it that I forget exactly what the legal term is, but it's essentially a same-day absentee ballot where they will bring you the absentee ballot envelopes and the ballot itself. You fill it out, you sign the envelopes, put everything in, hand it in. You voted. You have still been allowed the ability to exercise your right to vote. You just haven't been able to enter the polling place. Again, I'm not sure if that's what's going to happen in Manchester on election day, but if for some reason in another city you are unable or unwilling to enter the polling place, then you can do the same day absentee. And this goes for a variety of things, not just wearing a mask in the polling place, but if you're wearing a expressly political shirt, which you are not allowed to do inside the polling place in New Hampshire. There was actually the story back on primary election day where a woman took her shirt off and went in and voted. So, yes, she voted without her shirt on. She was not denied her right to vote, but if she had not wanted to turn the shirt inside out, cover it up, or in her case, taking it off. That was her idea, by the way, not the moderator or supervisor of the checklist. But if you don't want to remove your political T-shirt, and they say you can't wear the political T-shirt inside the polling place, you can say, all right, well, I'll stand right here, and I want you to bring me the same-day absentee ballot. And they would then have to do that because you are being prevented from entering the polling place for something that I realize it's not entirely beyond your control, but within the scope of the statute, you would fit within being able to do the same day absentee ballot. And there was even something that came out specifically regarding the COVID virus about using that same day absentee provision for anyone unwilling or unable to enter a polling place on election day. There was a question where, I'm assuming that's a question about the LP state convention. I guess I can say it will be in Concord. I will not say anything further just because the convention committee is not ready to make announcements on things yet. Hopefully right after the election, which is when our next meeting is going to be, because we want people to focus on the election, which is again coming up in less than 2 weeks. One more town hall Thursday, next Thursday, the 29th. And I believe there might be a presidential debate that night. You might be saying, I thought the last one was scheduled for tonight with, Trump and Biden and the mute button. Well, it is, as far as the Commission on Presidential Debates sponsored debates. There is another debate that is being organized by the Commission for American Debates. And they have invited Dr. Joe Jorgensen, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. The question now becomes, we know that Dr. Jorgensen accepted her invitation, or at least I know because I saw the post on social media. The organizers of the event know. So Dr. Jorgensen has accepted the invitation. We don't know if Trump or Biden will accept the invitation to that. So there might be a presidential debate next Thursday. As far as gubernatorial debates, I don't know of any more that are coming up. I also didn't know that on Monday night, WMUR was hosting a gubernatorial debate because, one, I never got an invitation to it because I didn't meet their objective criteria of being one of the two most newsworthy candidates, I believe is what they said at the beginning of the debate. Yeah, we have objective criteria to find the two most newsworthy candidates. The news that they're a part of, where they determine who they cover. Yeah, that doesn't seem very objective to me. At least, and I don't want to seem as though I'm giving credit to New Hampshire Public Radio, but at least New Hampshire Public Radio published their criteria before their debate. And in years past, WMUR had done so as well. They would just, set the criteria at such to where they knew that the libertarians or independent candidates would not be able to meet the criteria. 2 years ago, it was raise $25,000, poll 12% in polls that the candidates weren't included in, the candidates being anybody other than Republican or Democrat, have campaign staff and have provided a list of public events. Well, obviously this year, because of the pandemic, public events are out the window. Campaign staff check, didn't raise 25,000, not polling 12%. Statewide, I am polling 12% among swing voters, according to a recent poll that I saw. I realize that's not what they mean there, but it could be argued that I fit the criteria. But yeah, this year they just didn't even pretend to have any objective criteria other than to say it at the opening of the debate and say, we picked the two most newsworthy candidates. That's not objective. Sorry. But of course, you know, what can be done about it? In theory, and I'm not necessarily advocating that anyone do this. I'm just throwing it out as here's something that could possibly be done. A complaint could be filed with the FCC stating that WMUR as a news organization is not abiding by the standards of integrity and journalism that they should be abiding by, and then ask that that complaint be placed in the public file for the station, which they would have to then put in their public file. And then anyone that ever asked to see the public file, not that anybody ever does, but if anybody did ask to see the public file, they would then see this complaint. And the FCC, whenever WMUR's broadcast license comes up for renewal and a hearing, that would, in theory, then be discussed of, hey, naughty, you haven't been abiding by journalistic integrity. You should do better next time. License approved. That's probably what's going to happen. But again, in theory, a letter could be written to the FCC, but that's really about it. Maybe a letter to the editor of one of the newspapers. Not sure if they would necessarily publish it. But I did read, just one final thing here. I did read where somebody had actually called WMUR and they were asking for what exactly was the objective criteria, and just saying the two most newsworthy candidates, that's not objective criteria. What criteria did you use to determine the two most newsworthy candidates? And this person said that they wound up getting contacted by the lawyer for WMUR, who basically said, knock it off. We're not giving you any answers. Which, again, very shady. Definitely not journalistic integrity at all there. But because they're the only broadcast television station in New Hampshire, they will do whatever they want, and they know that they can pretty much get away with it. So unless there are any final questions, I will go ahead and wrap up the Town Hall Thursday for this week. Just give the Soviet Union had at least two options. Well, in theory, we have the illusion of options here. You can either vote for the red team that agrees with the blue team on about 90% of stuff. You can vote for the blue team that agrees with the red team on 90% of stuff, or you can vote for somebody else and then be told that you're wasting your vote. He says the two media companies. Touche. Where, yeah, New Hampshire, as far as big media goes, there's WMUR, which is the TV station. There are a couple dozen newspapers, although all of the ones that are published on the Seacoast are owned by the same company. All of the ones in the Lakes region and North Country are owned by one company. There's a couple of newspapers in, like the Connecticut River Valley area. But the big newspaper is the Union Leader. There's the Concord Monitor, which surprisingly is not that big of a newspaper. There's also Nashua has a small paper. And surprisingly, a lot of people in New Hampshire get their news from the Boston Globe, which I guess shouldn't be too surprising considering that New Hampshire is not really that far from Boston. But, having grown up in Birmingham, Alabama, if anybody said that they were getting their news from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, you'd be like, why are you reading a paper from a different state? But apparently, New England is a completely different animal in a completely different world. That animal, by the way, is a porcupine. So with that weird ramble to wind up at least saying porcupine once during the show, let me go ahead and wrap up. And again, I'll see you next Thursday. I was going to say I do the Town Hall Thursdays every Thursday until the end of the month, but next week is the end of the month. So again, DarrylWperry.com is the website. I'm actually going to be doing a fairly decent size advertising purchase for this weekend. So if you want to help offset that cost so that I can do some other more targeted advertising, which I am doing, DarrylWperry.com/donate. And again, next Thursday, 6 o'clock, I'll probably do again the half hour, 45 minutes next Thursday on the final Town Hall Thursday. And of course, don't forget the election night Zoom-tastic voyage happening on, obviously, election night, starting at 8 o'clock, which is actually when the results start rolling in New Hampshire, other than for the couple of towns that vote at midnight. So when you wake up on election day, you should see something about votes in Hart's location and Dixville Notch. Hopefully I get a few votes in either or both of those places so that it winds up giving a little bit of newsworthiness to the campaign, if you will. So yeah, those are the really the final two events of the campaign, unless something comes up. Again, I wasn't told about WMUR's debate that happened this Monday. So if there's a debate happening next week, I've not been told about it yet. But if I find out that one is happening and I'm invited, excellent. I'll post it on social media and also try to shoot out an email on that. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. Have a good night.